Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck tech video. Today I'm going to try to catch up with a few of my current experimental decks. This one is an Olivia Mobilized for War discard deck. This is kind of a tricky thing because in EDH typically when you think of discard power you think of Grixis and Nekasar. Because if you make everyone discard their cards, then half of your tech gets turned off if you can't further discard. And that's my experiment here, is seeing how we can make that run, specifically excluding blue and draw cards like Wheel of Fortunes to refill the opponent's hand. That is the experiment this deck is running. I've actually played with Olivia before. When she first got spoiled, I ran her as a bit of a reanimator deck, playing around with Goryo's Vengeance and trying to actually trick instant speed Eldrazi into play using her discard effect, and then giving them haste and annihilating out. It's a cute little gimmicky deck, but too fragile. This deck is also a little fragile. The curve on the deck is very low. When trying to do discard, or what my friends are calling turbo discard, there's not exactly quick mana stability here. Like, I can't actually dedicate too many cards to being the same thing. Quick mana, or all discarding, or effects that help after discarding. And that's where I'm tuning it as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and show the current progress of the deck. We have Olivia as the commander. Because she's a discard outlet in the command zone, she can give other creatures haste. This did start as a tribal specter deck after the legendary one was spoiled from Dominaria. The deck is down to one single specter. So Olivia here as the commander is a 3-mana 3/3 flyer, vampire knight. There's some interesting knight tech decks I've seen out there. She has the ability of saying whenever another creature enters the battlefield on my side, I can discard a card. If I do, it becomes a vampire with a counter and that creature gains haste. In short, she is here to help as a discard outlet in the command zone. Comparatively, some decks may want to run Neheb. Not the mono red one. Neheb's in the actual deck itself as another discard enabler, but I like the flying body better. This deck does tend to get into a state where everyone is depleted cards very quickly, and having a 2 first strike power on the ground was not as good as having a 3/3 in the air. So I could still do stuff with combat. Let's take Olivia over here, and I shall show the deck via card type. We'll start with creatures. Now, some of this won't look or make a lot of sense. Some of these cards appear very underwhelming. For example, Asylum Visitor had a lot of speculation about it. It is essentially a madness card. The draw thing is very good when I do get everyone hellbent, which does happen. And again, I'll describe as we go how the games typically go. In short, when it comes to a mass discard deck like this, unless you have some kind of combo win, the player at the table who has the most resilient deck or combo from their commander in the command zone with the least amount of parents is likely to win. But something like this is a very good card. I can discard it early to whatever effect I have, which there's a lot. And in late games, it actually does help me redraw when everyone ends up being hellbent, including myself. We have, this is Dream Stealer. This is one of the specters that has left over from the deck, mainly because it's something I can cast from my graveyard. And this deck, I myself will run out of cards very quickly, and this gives me something later to do, opposed to all the other specters that don't. The best specter this would replace, or could replace this, is the one with Wither that does the same thing he does, which is, this guy has Menace, and he makes an opponent discard cards per his power when he connects to them. There's a specter that's 3 mana for a 1/1 flyer that does the same thing. Typically, on that one, you just give it equipment. This one, although you can eternalize, making it a 4/4 instead of a 1/2. We have Liliana's Spectre, the last Spectre in the deck. This is essentially one of many cards in the deck that hit all opponents. Again, as a multiplayer deck, making targeted discard like Hymn to Torok and Thoughtseize and Rakdos Return and Mind Twist, while those are very good cards, you can't play them in multiplayer because you're essentially hating one player out of the game. And you then cannot actually deal with the other players. So this deck is full of each opponent discard effects, such as this one. Then we have Big Game Hunter, another madness card. This typically is held up in hand for late game. We have a bunch of spot removal on this deck, only one board wipe. But again, the curve on this deck is very low, so having a 1 mana removal spell is actually very good. We have Stronghold Rats, one of the effects that makes each player, including myself, discard a card. Shadow creatures are always fun. Again, this is something that can chip away when people, they're hellbent, but they still have some blocker out, so this helps. Stormkirk Occultist is another madness card, one we can discard and can help generate value. Again, this deck itself will run out of cards, so there's a lot of effects in here that can passively get more cards as the game progresses. She, although, is squishy. She dies real fast. We have Neheb, an alternative commander. Essentially, he's basically a 2/2 first strike until I'm hellbent. Making everyone discard at the same time is alright. I like the control of discarding when I go to combat or cast creatures with Olivia better than this. On-board discard effects that you don't have to actually reliably hit with are just better, something you can cast in main phase, for example. We have Deal Broker, the best merfolk looter in black and red. Most red looters, like Mad Prophet, they make you discard first and then draw. This is the only one in these colors that lets you actually draw first before you discard. Thus, it is the best looter in the deck. Again, this is something we can use at the end of turn to like madness on someone else's turn. We have Bloodhall Priest, probably one of the worst cards in the deck, but it is a 4/4 beat stick. It can come out, it can be one of the first things we end up attacking with if we deplete everybody's cards. A 4/4 is actually somewhat relevant, and shocking off little like Bird of Paradises, whatever that come off early, is actually pretty good too. We have Sire of Insanity, of course, everyone, when it comes to mass discard decks, you can take a few routes, one of which is just force a Sire of Insanity as fast as possible. That's more like a Reanimator deck. Another one would be like Mind Slicer, but this deck has no sacrifice effects. So Sire of Insanity is here basically just to keep everyone hellbent when possible. 6 mana is very steep. As you're seeing, of the creatures, there's not much that costs more. Thought Render Lamia is another one of those each opponent discards. The cool thing on her is there's a bunch of enchantments in this deck. I think there's more than 10 enchantments in this deck. So essentially every consecutive enchantment after her will continually make each opponent discard a card. Ironically enough, this is probably one of the bigger threats in the deck and something I like to try to ritual out fast, and my friends have sadly learned to kill it as fast as possible. There's a difference from a card where I have to pay mana to make an opponent discard a card, and then me just casting like a Phyrexian Arena and still getting the effect of what my deck is trying to do. And last of is a Runehorn Hellkite. There is no longer a Reforge the Soul or Wheel of Fortune in the deck, because again I need to control when I'm allowing my opponents to draw cards. The best I can do is an instant speed one. At the end of an opponent's turn, I can do this if I have 6 mana. Allowing everyone to draw 7 is dangerous in a deck designed around making everyone go hellbent, because I don't have the blue to support the wheels, the counter magic, the bounce, things like that you would usually see in a Nekasar deck. Otherwise, Wheel of Fortune would... Yeah, again, this is a branch. This could be a pay and draw deck, which is, again, something I've already experimented with. Underworld Dreams, not Pain Magnification, but the Spiteful Visions. Things like that hurt when opponents draw can be added, but this is purely a discard deck. This is really the only wheel in the deck. Let's go on to the spells. Now, there is a massive stack of spells. There is a one of Dark Ritual for some quick drops. There are some very back-breaking enchantments in this deck, and the odds of seeing that on turn 1 assisted by Dark Ritual can change and warp the game. Thus, Dark Ritual is probably one of the best cards we can see in the beginning of the game. Again, there's not a lot of high mana cost cards in the deck, but this is here just to get some dumb card out on turn 1 if possible. We have 2 tutors in Demonic and Vampiric. That's really the only ones I was willing to run due to the mana cost. We have Army of the Damned. This is one of 3 win conditions in the deck. Again, this is something I can cast or flashback later in the game. We have a nice stack of 13 shiny zombies to go with it. This is one of 3 win conditions. It's very expensive. Being that expensive makes this probably the worst. It's stuck in here mainly because of the flashback. Being able to wheel it early if it's bad. Now, there's a lot of draw and discard in the deck. That is the theme of the deck. So we have Faithless Looting to help us on turn 1, and Tormenting Voice and Cathartic Reunion on turn 2 or later. These help us, again, if we need a madness something, we can get it off of these for just good value. Then we have the stuff that impacts everybody. Burning Inquiry is fantastic. If you're familiar with some modern decks that run Waste Not and Burning Inquiry, this is the closest that we can try to do that in EDH within black and red. Everyone drawing 3 and discarding 3 at random. I can't control what I discard, but neither can my opponents. Delirium Schemes is also something great. If you do this on turn 1 after you Dark Ritual, pushing everyone down to 3 cards, it makes for interesting games. People then have to decide on what they're keeping. when you open up your hand in EDH, you usually see mana, acceleration, and a plan. And if on turn 1 you're losing 3 of those cards, you have to change your plan immediately. Do you keep the acceleration? Do you keep the late game effect? Do you keep... yeah, things like that is exactly what this deck is trying to do. So yeah, it hurts me, but 3 cards for 3 mana on 1, very good. The rest of these are each opponent discard effects, and I do have a vampire to leech off of this one. 3 mana is the best. This one tends to draw me a few cards, although if an opponent is already hellbent, this will do nothing. Again, then we have to be careful with the number of these that we run in the deck, because after an opponent has no cards in hand, these become dead cards to draw, which is, again, why we have things like Tormenting Voice, so we can discard it later. We have Skull Rend, which is fantastic because it has random. Again, something that you can really screw up an opponent's plans if they can't control what they discard. We have Murderous Compulsion. There's about 6 targeted removal spells in one board wipe in the deck. 3 of them are Madness cards, so it's like I'm discarding for advantage. This one's pretty bad. It typically just knocks out an early game mana dork, but I mean, that's still a good tempo. We have Dark Withering, which is a very expensive bad card, or 1 mana for a Doomblade, whatever. We have a Lightning Bolt via Fire Temper, Terminate, Go for the Throat, and Dismember are my 3 favorite spot removals that are in almost all of my black decks, or black-red decks. And we have a Wipe and Toxic Deluge. Again, the mana cost is an issue with this deck. Everything is as low to the ground as possible. So, Damnation could be in here, but realistically I would probably play Fire Covenant over Damnation. But Toxic Deluge is better than both. Next, let's go through the enchantments. Again, there's a nice stack of them here, a big old stack of enchantments. These are the ones that are great to see if I can Dark Ritual out on turn 1. Again, every single turn, making everyone discard is great. Better than Necrogen Mist is Bottomless Pit, where it is at random. If you get this on turn 1, and people start randomly discarding their lands that they needed to play their spells or their ramp, you can really screw up someone's game. And then we have Oppression. Again, this can backfire and hurt us, but typically this will shut off a Storm player, someone playing combo. The guy who will come back and refill their hand the fastest, this will still mess with them. We have Words of Voice. This one's a little confusing, and people oftentimes have to check the Oracle text and the rules. Essentially, this replaces a draw step or a draw effect on my turn by making each opponent discard for 1 mana. And I can stack that. If I Reforge the Soul or Wheel of Fortune, I can pay 7. That actually doesn't work. That's a non-bow. This is an interesting rule. When you Wheel of Fortune, yes, everyone draws 7, but it actually is me as the active player would draw 7. The person to my left would draw 7, and all around. So this does not combo with Wheel of Fortunes. By the time I'm drawing the cards and triggering this, they don't have cards to discard. But on my upkeep, for example, or if I Cathartic Reunion, I can pay into this to make everyone mutually discard. Eldest Reborn is a newer inclusion from Dominaria. It has the second effect of each opponent discarding, and each player sacking is actually very good too. But I mean, it's a reanimation effect on an enchantment body. This is a nice 3 effects in a 5 mana costing enchantment. We have 3 nice effects for bleeding per discard. Again, these are great if I can combo them early, but once everyone is hellbent, not so good. This one is really good because, again, I have a flying commander, so I can usually hit somebody with her, and I can target an opponent, not the person I attacked with, to force the discard. That's just interesting. Of course, these go in mana cost order if you saw 2, 3, and 4. And then we have, again, these are more along the lines of Windmores or ways of actually taking advantage of people discarding cards. Again, giant stack of zombies. I can sometimes combo this by drawing and forcing more discard on the same turn. Sometimes I'll just try to trick this out with 1 or 2 discard cards, and that will eventually let me go off in the same turn, making everyone discard all at once while I build up a zombie army. It's kind of cool. Hey, this is ideally the biggest threat in the deck, and people know to get this out of there. Painful Quandary is kind of expensive. I'm thinking about removing it. Again, this is nice. It forces, once everyone's in Hellbent, they have to start paying 5 life to cast spells. And that is very good, but 5 mana is kind of hard to reach to when I'm getting to that point. Hedonist Trove is a bad card. This is one of the win conditions in the deck that I'm experimenting with. Essentially 7 mana, I can get someone's graveyard. I can play lands and I can play spells. 7 mana is a lot to ask for, and this could be a better win condition. But I'm actually enjoying it right now. It allows me to do some really dumb stuff, especially if there's a green player at the table and they had to discard a ramp, or they played a ramp earlier, because I can very quickly just rebuild or go nuts. This is an interesting card. This is probably really the only type of deck this card fits in, unless you have a very casual Nekasar deck. And of course, if someone exiles all graveyards at some point in the game, this is a 7 mana do nothing. We have 3 reanimation effects. Again, these are really good for making people discard early bombs if they're afraid they're not going to be able to get the resources to cast something. So if they end up discarding something like an Elesh Norn, I can very quickly warp the game just by pulling it back on my side. Dance of the Dead, of course, puts it into play. Then we have a lot of effects that help me recur some cards. We have 1 arena, a land arena, and an outpost siege. The Vance's Blasting Cannons is definitely not good enough in this deck. It can't let me get lands, and it's a 4-drop opposed to a 3-drop. Arena is the best. Again, sometimes a fantastic turn 1 play if you have a Dark Ritual. Now, typically in my decks, I only run 1 Planeswalker. This deck actually runs 2. Dreddy is here basically just for the +2. There's a few artifacts in the deck. The ultimate's nothing, but this is here as a plus to continually draw and discard cards, giving me a free discard trigger for madness and all sorts of fun stuff. The new one is Angrath. Again, his +1 does what I want the deck to do, making each opponent discard. The ultimate's cute. The -3 actually can help remove some removal, like if they have a mana dork, I can kill it, or I can hit somebody with something. Very funny card and on point for what this deck is trying to do. Let's go through the artifacts next. We have a nice selection of Mana Ramp and about 3 other things. So we have 2 1-drops, again, good at filtering the deck to thin out lands. A bunch of 2-drops to help us get a 4-drop on turn 3 if possible. And again, this one's really good because I can draw later once I don't need it. Sword of the Animist is another passive way of card advantage. Again, I have a flying commander. And if everyone's hellbent and I shoot out basic lands every turn, I'm essentially getting an extra card per turn. We have Mask of Memory as another way of getting a discard trigger. Drawing 2 and discarding 1 is pseudo advantage. Well, yeah, it is advantage. And again, I can use that discard to help madness stuff into play, so it's more like draw 2 cards, cast a spell. We have Lightning Greaves for protection. Sword of Feast and Famine, because it says the word discard on it, and it is a good sword. And we have Crucible of Worlds and Geth's Grimoire. So there's a bunch of cycling lands in the deck. We have a Wasteland Strip Mine, and I am discarding a bunch of cards. So this is 100% necessary for this type of deck. Geth's Grimoire is another one of those warped game state kind of cards that if I make everyone discard cards, I'm going to refill really quickly. This is like a variant of Waste Not in how much advantage I can take. For example, this sticks and I Burning Inquiry with 3 opponents. I'm going to draw, well, I'm drawing my 3 and discarding 3 at random. Everyone discarding 3 at random is going to cause me to draw 9 cards. 1 mana, draw 9 cards. Just think about that, yeah. This card is typically destroyed immediately. It's like the Alhammer's Archive of the deck, really. Then we have a bunch of lands. Actually, 36 lands may be 1 too many. I may end up putting like another draw filter kind of card. Like what is the red one? I don't remember what to call it. But in short, if I drop another land, I'll put another filter in here. We have 2 fetchables. This one can get non-basics. Well, 3. Again, fun things to pull back from the graveyard with Crucible Worlds. We have 2 lands that it can fetch. We have all the colorful black-red lands to help fix our colors. This is Dragon Skull Summit. Let's keep on going. This is a bunch of cycling lands. Essentially every cycling land possible is in this deck. I'm actually thinking about changing this. And I really want the Onslaught version because this doesn't match. I may get rid of these instead of these because the 2 colors opposed to 1 color is worse. Too many come into play tap lands is a bad thing. And this one, I actually kind of like it more than these because it guarantees a landfall and it still sets up something for the Crucible. And we have Urborg for color fixing. No coffers. There's 0 reason to have a Cabal coffers in this deck. Most expensive card in the deck is a 1 of 7 drop. Then we have like 3 or 4 6 drops and that's it. We have Ancient Tomb for some dumb fast things in the early game. Strip Mine and the Wasteland to go with the Crucible. And 8 swamps and 8 mountains. All these hideous unglued ones that I hate them, but I don't like getting rid of cards that apparently sustain some kind of value. So we have an Olivia discard deck. And again, this is not exactly the best or smartest type of deck to play. How this works and how the games tend to work is unless my spells are countered, which typically a control deck won't actually counter a few discard spells. What happens in like a 4-player game is everyone will get hellbent very quickly. Around turn 3 or 4, hopefully if my draws have been not bad, I've impacted their hand a few bits. Someone may already be out of cards if they had a quick start. The problem with this deck is whoever at the table will recover the quickest. Or if someone at the table, for example, has a very powerful commander, I'm dead. And I basically king made whoever is going to win the game. For example, if there's a Sigarda at the table that I can't kill, like the good Sigarda, or as a Kama, or some ramp general, and the opponent just kept ramp spells and they got their commander in play and I can't deal with the commander, that person is likely going to win the game. Unfortunately, there's really nothing I can do about that other than maybe not play this deck against that situation. This is a very fun deck though, and it's a good experiment. I'm going to keep tinkering with it. I'm sure new cards like this will be printed. The mana cost on some of those each player discard a card spells has actually been steadily going down. If you noticed, this is one of the older effects of this. It is 4 mana. It's not the best. 4 mana, not that good. It's making everyone discard 2, discard 1 at 1. This is a 3-drop spell, and this just came out like, what, 2 sets ago? If development continually drops the mana cost of making each opponent discard, then a deck like this will become more viable. The mana cost, again, is the issue, because while everyone is ramping up and doing ridiculous things, I'm just playing discard spells. So again, this is not exactly the most powerful of decks. It's more of an annoyance really to a lot of players, and some people get pretty grumpy making them discard and watching as someone else at the table goes off. But it's definitely a fun experience, so I would definitely suggest it. Do stay tuned. I have a plethora of decks I've been playing around with and tinkering with over the past month. I'll be posting shortly. Thanks.